the lies, lies. This is from Opticon, that's from the fashion bomb. So helpless, guess what you're out of time.
It's a bank holiday, so I can't really do an FTGE today, so instead I'm going to address what everyone else is addressing, the Tommy Robinson situation. But I want to make sure that I've got all my ducks in a row, so this is a bit more scripted than usual. In talking about Tommy Robinson, you immediately run into problems because Tommy Robinson isn't a real person. That's an alias. His real name is Stephen Christopher Yaxley Lennon, which sounds posh. He isn't particularly posh. He owns a tanning salon. You know, he seems to do alright for himself with that and his various activist work. But yeah, that's just one of several aliases that he has used over the years. So separating fact from fiction is incredibly difficult when it comes to Tommy Robinson because certain things have been blown up. He has shown a propensity to, if not outright lie, to embellish the truth or to get details and things wrong. So everything's difficult. There is this mythological almost figure, Tommy Robinson, and it's really hard to know what's true or accurate. I mean, we can make some fairly good faith kind of guesses as to what's true. It's very likely that he has been victimised by Muslim inmates in prisons. It's very likely that the government is pissed off at him. It's also very likely that he has exaggerated things and done a lot of stuff that is deeply questionable, possibly even illegal. But we have to take everything that we hear with a very large pinch of salt. So that's a problem right away going into this. There's other complications to Tommy Robinson that are worth talking about. He is one of... Well, we're all well aware that many journalists act as activists through their journalism. Tommy is an activist who pretends to be a journalist. So kind of coming at it the other way, and we need to keep that in mind when talking about him. He's far from the only one. But if we have a problem with journalists using their platform to be activists, I think we should also be wary of activists using their platform to be journalists. And there's far too many of those as well. I mean, it's inescapable, but if we disapprove, then our disapproval should be universal and consistent, is what I'm saying. Now, Tommy is unusual in that he is a person who does appear to have gradually de-radicalised. You know, when he was first noteworthy, he was a member of the British National Party, which was a very far-right organisation. Its leader at the time, Nick Griffin, used to be a member of the National Front, which was an even more extreme version of the same thing. So he's always been associated with the far right, but he has gradually moved back towards the centre over time. He's still very much firmly on that fairly dangerous working class right, but he has moderated over time, and that's something that should be applauded. Anyone who just immediately dismisses him as a fascist doesn't know the history, doesn't know what's gone on or how his views have shifted over time. So don't trust people who say that. But that said, many of his views are still rather unnuanced and unpalatable. But he does get a lot of mud slung at him, and how much of that is justified, that's another matter altogether. Now, if Tommy is a complicated fellow, then the situation in which he finds himself is even more complicated. So, we have this problem that Asian grooming gangs have been operating with relative impunity and lack of suspicion for years, with many, many, many victims, most of them young girls in working class, predominantly white communities. They're not exclusively Asian gangs. White paedophiles have joined in with them, and so on. It's partially cultural, and part of the reason that they have gotten away with it for so long is because of fears of accusations of racism. That is what little we can say is really established fact, and the tabloids have got themselves into a frenzy about this. You know, that there are problems and issues around it. The police have come under heavy criticism for it, which makes the whole situation rather fraught and dangerous for everybody involved. Now, Tommy and others quite rightly want there to be justice in these cases. They want whoever is responsible for these acts to be held accountable, and have applied their own pressure in much the same way as the media has. It's mostly been the tabloid right-wing media that has been pushing this, and the right and the far right have made a lot of ground, they've made a lot of hay out of all of these accusations and complications and issues. Now, hopefully we can all agree that everyone deserves a fair trial. Tommy deserves a fair trial for whatever it is he's supposed to have done, and whoever is accused of being members of this paedophile gang, they deserve a fair trial. Tommy's involvement and interference in these trials, as well as that of the tabloid media and so on, prejudices any potential juries and places these people who at this point are merely accused and not necessarily guilty under a great deal of danger, social and political strain. In fact, Tommy's outing of people who have been accused has led directly to harassment and possibly a miscarriage. That's a physical miscarriage, a lost baby, not a miscarriage of justice. That said, I do think we do need to be wary, because when the police are under a lot of pressure in situations like this, they have been known to fit people up for the crime, to frame them. This happened a lot during the troubles with the IRA. They would, in the wake of a bombing, find someone who looked good enough and get a conviction on that basis. So it's reasonably likely that something like that, or at least the atmosphere that encourages that kind of thing to happen, could be happening now. That makes it even more important that we get a fair trial. And Tommy is prejudicing that possibility of these people getting a free trial, and he is increasing the possibility of some sort of vigilante justice being meted out upon people who have, at this point, only been accused and not convicted. That appears to be why the judges and so on, in multiple cases now, have sought to try and prevent Tommy from interfering in these processes. And to that extent, that is right, that is good, that is proper. In the broader context, though, it seems a little pointless, because the media has already been reporting quite heavily on these. So it's kind of locking the stable door after the horse has bolted, and does certainly appear to be a way of picking on Tommy. But that doesn't absolve Tommy of wrongdoing. You know, just because everyone else did it isn't really much of an excuse. Now, Tommy hasn't been banged up for reporting on this exactly. He has 2 standing previous convictions with suspended sentences for interfering in a trial. This essentially, I forget the exact legal terms, but this is essentially what he has done by outing people who are merely accused and so on. That's previously, and then he did it again and was brought back before the court, and both times his sentence was suspended. So this is like his 3rd strike, if you like, for interfering in legal processes. I mean, the judge didn't have a lot of other options, which isn't to say that they have acted well in this instance either. But yeah, he just wasn't stopping. So really, what he has been done for is contempt. Contempt of court, and often the law is contemptible, the law can be an ass, but the proper place to challenge that is really in the courts. So either he's martyring himself, or he's stupid, or something, but yeah, to say that it's just because he's reporting on these grooming gangs is to misrepresent the situation. He has defied the rulings of the court 3 times, gotten away with it twice, and eventually the patience of the courts runs out. Should courts be able to do this to someone? Yes, if you're in contempt, if you breach a ruling that has been made, they probably should. You know, we hopefully all agree that a country should be run by its laws, and when the law is an ass, that's when you activate to try and change things politically, or you challenge things in the courts to try and get precedent rulings to show that the law is an ass. In this instance, he has, there's no question that he has breached the terms of his suspended sentences on these previous occasions. And so that's why he's banged up. That is further complicated by Tommy Robinson being Tommy Robinson, because he is likely to be attacked in prison, and so you can't really keep him in the general population without it being fairly obvious that he is going to end up being attacked, especially if you put him in prison somewhere where there are a lot of Muslim prisoners. And solitary confinement is a lot more common in the US than it is in the UK and Europe. In the UK and Europe, it's considered an extreme form of punishment, something to be reserved for really bad cases, really bad prisoners. But it would be the only way of keeping him safe, unless you can find a prison with a tiny minority Muslim population, and even then he would be in trouble. And Muslims are disproportionately present in prisons, either through conversions while in prison, or simply due to the fact that immigrant populations tend to be poor and tend to run afoul of the law more often. So, you know, that's really difficult. But I mean, what else is there that you can do other than remand him in custody? It's hard to know. I mean, he's shown that he's willing to defy orders from the court on multiple occasions. So, you know, binding him over in some other way just isn't gonna cut it. So I don't think the courts had much room to manoeuvre on this. Now, where I think the courts have unambiguously fucked up in this instance is the ban on reporting on what's happened with Tommy, and it's unusual and overreaching in the fact that reporting on the issue around Tommy has been blocked because of an entirely separate and different trial. So we have two competing sets of freedoms, of people's rights in tension with one another. So there's no easy answer, but I don't think failing to report or enforcing a reporting ban on what's happened with Tommy makes sense at all. I mean, we all know about the Streisand effect, and this treatment of Tommy only feeds the paranoia and conspiracy theories already present on the far right, especially when you combine it with the recent arrest of Based Amy, Bacon Lady, the Queen of Speaker's Corner, who appears to be a mildly deranged and somewhat thick middle-aged lady who live-streamed her arrest, and it did seem dodgy. So we have this complex mix of things going on. We have a social and media culture that is predominantly very left-wing, very progressive, very social justice warrior-y, and that has in part contributed to the fact that these grooming gangs got away with things for as long as they have. And then on the other side of things, we have an actually rather right-wing, rather authoritarian government at the moment, with a lot of law and order issues and so on, that seems to be trying to quash free speech and free expression in a lot of different ways. And while I disagree with what people like Tommy and Based Amy say or grunt across the media, I think they have every right to do so. When it comes to biasing a trial like this, I think we can say that I would prefer it if the accused had the same anonymity protections as the accusers. Certainly that's the case, I would say, in a lot of other trials. I mean, a lot of us agitate for the fact that people who are accused of rape should retain anonymity, because these are life-destroying accusations, whether you're found guilty or not. So we should try and protect someone up until the point they're actually found guilty of the crime that they are accused of, and that's the same thing in this instance. So where does all this leave us? Well, nobody is a hero when you actually dig down into it. Everyone is human, everyone has feet of clay, and Tommy Robinson is certainly no exception. Not that he's a hero of mine at all. Everyone deserves a fair trial, whether they're Tommy Robinson or whether they are an alleged Asian grooming gang. Courts should be able to enforce their rulings whether we agree with them or not, and the proper place to challenge them is in the courts and through the government, until such point as it becomes obvious that that remedy is never ever going to work, at which point you can consider other things. The only really unquestionably problematic thing going on here is the press restrictions. It's pointless in this day and age anyway because of social media, and yet the attempt to enforce it is concerning, and it only feeds the fire of conspiratorial thinking and victimhood that already exists on the right and far right. It's the very opposite of helpful when it comes to this situation. So I think that's where we should be focusing our ire. Zang.
Now, Bob, consider this next question very carefully. What is your one purpose in life?
To explode, of course.